Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on our latest adventure down the MIPS pathways here. Today, we're going to be going over MVPs for the most part, understanding MIPS. This is definitely a next level from the beginner. So if you need beginner type information, the presentation that we did last month is an introduction into MIPS. This takes it to the next level. Today, I'm going to be joined by Philip Spence. Hey, Phil.
Hello there, everyone.
And we're going to go over MVPs, and we're going to go over some tricks and tips. And this is a very exciting time here at HealthMonics. We are in the world of submission. Submission season for last year has opened up for reporting, so life gets a little crazy right now. And at the same time, we have new people starting and 2025 tracking beginning to start. And the other thing I have to say before I get started is go birds. So handouts and so forth, what you need is all going to be here. Oh, I got a thumbs down. Yay. uh, what you got to be here, what you'll be able to see is you'll be able to get all of the documentation from this webinar, as well as I'll also send everything out to you later this afternoon. And then you could ask any of your questions on the right-hand side of the screen. You'll be able to see the questions, and Phil and I will try to get back to everybody today, but if not, we will be getting back to everybody. We usually are pretty swift with that. So without further ado, let's get this party started. Today we are going to be going over understanding MVPs, eligibility and participation, as well as score maximization strategies. For those who may be having issues hearing, please try to sign out and sign back in, as I'm getting positive feedback that sound is working. So understanding MVPs. What are MVPs? Well, MVPs is short for MIPS value pathways. So we're all hopefully on this call very familiar with MIPS. This is a new pathway for organizations all the way down to solo practitioners to be able to report their quality improvement activities, promoting interoperability to CMS. It's a subset of measures, so we're shrinking the measures, the number of measures that you can report in each MVP. It reduces barriers to the more complex APM models because these are really have the ability here to get into a smaller group of measures as well as a smaller, uh, more accurate group to what CMS is looking for from growth in APMs, moving folders, and ACOs. It is aimed at aligning the cost, quality, and improvement activity categories with different specialties or conditions. So you'll see that in a little bit. Can be used to meet MIPS reporting requirements. So this is another pathway. And it leverages the same PI and claims-based measures that you are utilizing inside MIPS. So where do MVPs fit? Here's a very nice graph of what it looks like, the different options you have. So you can report through traditional MIPS. There is the APM performance pathway, and then there's the MIPS value pathway. Up top, you have, for traditional MIPS, you could report as a group, an individual, which most people are very well aware of, as well as the APM entity, or a virtual group, which has very limited number of people that utilize that. Through the APM performance pathway, you can report as a group, individual. ACOs have to report through this, and then you can also do the virtual group. For MVPs, ACOs aren't involved in MVPs, so this is just group, individual, APM entity, but there is a fifth category called subgroup. And we're going to get into detail what subgroups look like and how they work moving forward. So what is the timeline, or what has the timeline looked like? I've been sharing a very similar slide since 2022, I think, and we are just trudging down the line further in this. So in 2022, your only option was traditional MIPS. So then in 2023 reporting, began the voluntary MVP and subgroup reporting. We had a number of groups report through us over the years in 2023 to kind of get started. In 2024, we have even more groups that are reporting MVPs. Now we're getting into 2025. So there's not really a big difference between 23, 24, and 25. This is just introduction years to MVPs, another option for reporting. As we move into 2026, there's a little caveat to this, and that is that subgroup reporting. So those who are reporting MVPs, you don't have to report MVPs, but those who are reporting MVPs and are part of multi-specialty groups will need to split their specialties into subgroups based upon what the eligibilities for each of the MVPs are. So we'll be getting more and more information about that as we move into 2026, but that language has not changed in any of the final rules or rules that we're looking at. In the future, they're saying that traditional MIPS is going to end. I think we're still a good amount of time away from that. I'd say 2030 is probably the earliest that we'll see MIPS end and being forced into mandatory MVP reporting. So a little comparison between traditional MIPS and MVPs. I'll go over the three main categories here. Quality. So for quality and traditional MIPS, it's 6 measures you need to report. For MVPs, there's only 4. It streamlines and aligns with your practice, so your specialty or the type of patients that you're seeing. So really giving you an opportunity, hopefully, to get away from the very basic measures like, your medication lists and your advanced care plan, things that you've been doing since the good old PQRS days in 2015, 16, 17, around then. Improvement activities. What is nice about it is that it actually is going to cut the amount of improvement activities that you need to do if you are a large practice. If you're small, if you're considered a small practice, which is 15 or fewer providers, you will have to do one quality measure and one IA measure in 2026, or the equivalent, or 2025, sorry, or the equivalent of a high or 2 medium measures in 2024. Um, so it's a reduction in half for large groups uh, for MVPs, which is nice. Cost could be interesting, could work for you, could work against you, but the difference in traditional MIPS is that if you have eligible visits for cost measures, you can be scored on cost measures across every single available one. But if you're doing an MVP, the only cost score that you need to worry about are those cost measures that are associated with your MVP. So a lot of groups that may be scoring poorly on a number of cost measures, but there is an MVP that they can do that eliminates their lower scored cost measures, it's a good idea. However, that can also work backwards, where if the only cost measure in the MVP is something that you do poorly on, it can drag your score down. So CMS does give you the option of reporting both ways, and based upon that, you can utilize kind of different options for getting your cost score across the board. All right. Eligibility and participation. So MVP eligibility, it follows the same requirements as eligibility for traditional MIPS. The big difference is that you cannot opt in and report an MVP still. So that is there. You need to be identified as a MIPS eligible clinician type, have enrolled in Medicare before the performance year, so it can't be a new Medicare provider in the new year, not be qualified for an alternative payment, not be a QP, as well as you exceed the low volume threshold as an individual. Below you see the low volume thresholds. They have not changed in many, many years, but uh, they are here. So $90,000 of Medicare Part B charges, 200 plus Medicare Part B patients, as well as 200 plus covered professional services. So what's new with MVPs in 2025? It, minimal groups reported MVPs in 23. We'll have more 2024 information after submission this year. There were a lot more groups that applied for MVPs in 2024, but we won't know submissions till the end of March or early April. The two neurology-focused MVPs were combined. CMS added 6 more MVPs. We're going to go over those, which get together about 80% of specialties will be able to participate in MVPs. I know that's very, you know, not very direct number, that 80% of specialties, but that's how CMS is wording it now. The scoring of population health measures was updated. In the past, you needed to uh, pick which measure you wanted to count for you, and that would be what counts, even if you were not eligible for it. Now, CMS will take the highest score of all the available population health measures in the MVP, so that's one less thing that you need to worry about moving forward in 2025. Subgroups are required to report their affiliated group data for PI. So if you're reporting subgroups, you will need to utilize the PI data from the group score, not the individual subgroups. I just saw a question pop up, but these slides will be available. They're available on the side of the screen as attachment, and I will be sending the slides after the presentation wraps up today. MVPs available for the 2024 reporting period. They are listed right here. You would have had to sign up for these before November of 2024 for you to actually be able to do these. So these are the ones for 2024. You can see they do spread across many specialties. However, there are a lot of you on this call right now that don't have a specialty that lines up with here. And I think the main thing that CMS is getting across is that you need to have enough measures, quality measures for this to make sense, as well as you'll need a cost measure associated with your specialty for you to have an MVP. So some of your specialties will be getting new MVPs as we move forward. Otherwise, they always say in the final rule to speak with your specialty societies to work on help building more measures and to help build cost qualifications. So there are some changes. Not going to dig deep into these changes. There's a number of IA changes, measures that were added across the board for each of the MVPs that are available, as well as there was a couple added cost changes. So I'm not going to dig into these, but they are there for your viewing pleasure. And then here is the second part of that, where most of the changes, to be honest, are in the IA categories. So just keep a good eye out on what IAs are available for you. So for 2025, it is the introduction of the MVPs that you see here on the screen. So 2025, they added 6 new MVPs. That includes one for ophthalmology, dermatology, and gastro. Uh, here at HealthMonix, we have a lot of practices and clinicians in these specialties, and working with our team as well as doing your own research will really help you decide if these measures are available or is something that you want to consider doing. HealthMonix does uh, allow all of our customers to report on MVPs for any specialty. We have the availability to do so. The other specialties that you see here are going to be urology, pulmonology, and surgical care. These are, of these 6 measure of these six categories and MVPs. To be honest with you, I believe the first five have been very underserved when it comes to measures from CMS. Surgical care, there are more. As you can see, there's even 15 that are in the surgical care MVP. But I think you're going to see as I move on in 2026 what the asks uh, are going to be specialties that have always had trouble finding six measures. So the opportunity for them to be able to only report four could be very beneficial for them. So as I was saying, for MVPs in 2026, they're planning on adding the following: diagnostic radiology, interventional radiology, neuropsychology, pathology, podiatry, and vascular surgery. All of those have very, very limited number of measures over the years to be able to report on. Uh, you know, I laugh as Phil and I were going over this yesterday when we were reviewing this, and we're like, oh, people are going to be able to reach out to CMS to give feedback. Well, not really. That ended about 6 days ago. So no opportunity for feedback for 2026. But if that's something that you're very interested in moving forward, CMS does open up the opportunity for us for you to give feedback. So really gives you a say. I've had customers of mine or consulting partners that have actually come up and been quoted and proposed in final rules because of their asks and requests. So CMS does tend to listen when these requests go in. So I mentioned much earlier the different reporting options that we have. So MVPs are one reporting option for meeting your MIPS requirements. All right, so you could do MVPs or you could do traditional MIPS for the most part. That's what most people on this call are going to be able to do. But inside of MVPs, right? So now we're going to look away from traditional MIPS and look just inside MVPs. How can I report MVPs? So you can do an MVP as an individual. If you're part of a group, you can do it as an individual. If you are by yourself, you can do it as an individual. So just like traditional MIPS, you can report that as an individual. You can also report an MVP as your whole entire group. So if you have 20 providers in your group, you can all report the same MVP just like you would traditional MIPS. Now, where the change really comes in is this introduction to something called subgroups. So, with subgroups, you can pick and choose the clinicians in 2024 and 2025. You can pick and choose the clinicians that are going to be part of your subgroup. So, if you have three anesthesiologists and five surgical specialists, you can do the anesthesiology MVP for the three of them, and then the other five can do group group reporting, which would include everybody, and we'll get over that, or individual reporting, or if they didn't even need to report because they were below the threshold, you can move things around like that, and you'll see some examples in a little bit. And then the other option is the APM entity MVP. You can report if you're an APM entity, not an ACO. For subgroups, they will be required, as I stated earlier, for 2026. So are you required to report MVPs? No, nobody's required to report MVPs. MVPs are one option for meeting your MIPS reporting requirements. You can meet your MIPS reporting requirements through traditional MIPS. You could also do, APM performance pathway. Through the CMS is planning the sunset. I, I'll believe it when I see it. They've been saying it for a long time, but 2030 is about my prediction of when I think that might be gone. Do small practices have the same flexibility with MVPs? They do, very similar to your traditional MIPS. So receiving 6 bonus points in the quality performance category as long as one measure is submitted. So that's a little extra bonus for you. You're receiving 3 points for quality measures that don't have a benchmark or meet a case minimum. So large groups get 0, you can get 3. And promoting interoperability is automatically reweighted, the same in traditional MIPS as it is in the MVP. However, if you have a perfect score for promoting interoperability, and it's higher than your quality score, I highly recommend continuing to report promoting interoperability as the years go on, because I do think that at some point that's going to come back to small practices. They don't have reduced reporting requirements for IA. Everybody in IA needs to test from one measure in 2026 or the equivalent of either two medium or one high weighted measure in 2025. Can a clinician report multiple MVPs? This is where it starts to get a little tricky, and it's great because in 2 slides, I'm handing it over to Phil, who gets to deal with the tricky stuff. A clinician can participate in multiple ways to report MVPs. For example, if you have an entire group of internal medicine clinicians, you could report the Optimizing Chronic Disease Management MVP and a subset of those providers. So if you take 3 or 4 of them out that are high scoring on another MVP, you can also do the advanced care for heart disease MVP. The big thing is that a clinician can report as an individual, subgroup, group, APM entity, or any combination of these. However, they can't do two separate subgroups is kind of, and I might have that on another page. They cannot do two separate subgroups. They can only do one subgroup per tin that they are working with. There you go. I have it on the next screen. I started talking too soon. So a clinician can only participate in one subgroup per practice. So if you work at 2 different practices, you could report 2 different subgroups. And that by practice, they mean eligible TINs that are tax IDs that are reporting for MIPS or MVPs. So this is the fun part. So Phil, are you ready?
Appreciate it, Mike. Ready to go.
You got it.
So, thanks for that lead up. And as we've all just gone through, hopefully you understand a little more about the structure of MVPs, the measures that are available, the actual MVPs that are available, and how that has changed over time. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can maximize your score and strategies you can use to increase your performance through MVPs and additional items you'd want to consider before participating in an MVP. So first, I want to take a step back just to review again some of the benefits of participating in an MVP. As Mike already mentioned, the opportunity to connect more closely with the type of care that's being provided through an MVP is going to be one of the main reasons why you would want to participate. More meaningful measures and more meaningful improvement activities allows for a connected approach with accomplishing the measure objectives. And the intent is that through a more direct connection with those measures and activities, that clinicians will achieve higher outcomes or improved outcomes and higher scores through that alignment. Also, having a streamlined and more reduced set of measures and activities reduces the burden of reviewing and selecting which measures to choose from. As we work with a number of different types of provider groups and specialty groups, we hear a lot of frustration around how many measures there are to select from. So by minimizing the breadth of measures for consideration, particularly for specialty providers, you can focus on just those measures that are applicable for you. So as measures change year to year, you have the opportunity to track performance in and consider addition of a smaller set of measures. And hopefully by doing so, frees up more time for focus on the measures that are going to make the most sense for you. And then also through the alignment of these MVPs among different specialty provider groups, CMS sees the opportunity for enhanced performance feedback as the result will be more aligned clinician types reporting on more similar measures. So Mike mentioned some of the, you know, cross-cutting measures that a lot of clinicians have done, even dating back to the PQRS days. As more participants move into MVPs, we anticipate further alignment in what measures they're reporting on, and that would result in more direct comparison from one provider to the next and how they're reporting, as those measures are more relevant to the care they're providing. Another opportunity for participating in MVPs early is really the chance to become more familiar with MVPs and to leverage the experience gained from participation early prior to the requirements of MVPs in future years. As Mike has mentioned, CMS intends to sunset traditional MIPS in a future timeframe. We anticipate that's still going to be a few years from now, but by participating in MVP now, you can become more accustomed to the process of MVP participation. We'll actually go through some of the registration steps and what it requires to participate as compared to traditional MIPS. You can also become familiar with a smaller set of measures like we talked about. And then also understanding you can submit traditional MIPS and an MVP, and CMS will take the highest score. Furthermore, we'll talk about this a little bit further later as well. You can track performance in an MVP and then choose later not to report if your MVP participation and score does not look like it will achieve you a higher score than traditional MIPS. So really, it will bring additional familiarity that will help you down the line as MIPS continues to evolve and we see more refined opportunities like MVPs available for you. And then finally, the potential to reduce the overall burden for participation in CMS programs. So certainly CMS and MIPS makes up a large reporting requirement for eligible clinicians, but CMS sees the opportunity to align what is being done with MVPs in other CMS programs. And I would take that further to even say, as often CMS goes, other payers go in how they approach value-based care programs. So as we see this type of alignment for MVPs allowing more refined approach for specialty provider groups, we may see other changes to other value-based care programs as well. So getting on board with MVPs now can reduce your own burdens, but the hope and intent is across the board as more eligible participants participate in MVPs, we'll see alignment across other programs as well. Now, a few call outs when we're talking about maximizing performance. Some of these are going to sound very similar to what you would want to consider and do in looking at traditional MIPS, but can help really set you up for success when considering a MIPS value pathway as well. The first is really understanding what your reporting requirements are. For each of the different performance categories included in MIPS, knowing how many measures, knowing which measures, knowing if you are required to report one or two improvement activities, and understanding what type of cost measures. Some of that is going to be participating in webinars like this to get familiar with those requirements. Other ways is going to be looking back at your past performance and scores to see historically how you've measured up, particularly in a category like cost. Understanding what cost measures you've been scored on in the past is a great way to help set you up for future participation. And as Mike mentioned, one of the nuances of an MVP is going to be what cost measures you're exposed to. So that might be a great step if you have not already done so, comparing the cost measures you're eligible for in traditional MIPS against an MVP you may choose to participate and notice what that difference looks like. Focusing on patient outcomes and quality measures that have high scoring potential. That's something we talk a lot with our clients about, which is looking at not only your performance and quality measures, but aligning that with the benchmarks and the deciles to understand which measures are going to give you the highest scoring opportunities. Sometimes that is not very apparent. Other times, through dashboards that give you clear insight, you can see more easily which measures are going to give you the opportunity to improve your performance and have a bigger impact on improving your score. Setting goals is a key step in this process as well. As we've seen over the years with MIPS, the points required to avoid a penalty has continued to increase, leveling out a little bit over the past few years. The measure inventory has changed, and we've seen measures become more challenging. So this program continues to evolve and create more challenges for successful participation and high scoring. So understanding where you've come from, how you've performed in the past, and setting realistic goals for achieving either the same level of performance or hopefully improved performance is going to be critical. And we see MVPs as an opportunity to open up additional opportunities for increasing scores. Now, as we go through continued opportunities for maximizing your performance, let me go ahead and say that just through participating in an MVP doesn't mean all of a sudden you're going to get a better score. You have to really look at what opportunities there are within each MVP and how it best aligns with your practice and the care you're providing. Optimizing your data by leveraging EHRs and other technology solutions is another important step in participation in MIPS, maximizing your performance and preparing yourself for MVPs. If you're already using an EHR that provides feedback on quality metrics, great. And that's really going to help you and hopefully help within your workflows, capturing the right data, capturing the right information at the right time, but then also leveraging that to understand what measures you may need to add to your workflows or what measures you should consider that you may not have focused on previously. And then, of course, making sure you have technology solutions to track your performance, track your deciles, predict your score, and make that submission process easy. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we do that as well later in our presentation. A few more items here, of course, prioritizing measures that are relevant to you that aligns directly with MVPs. Understanding your patient population, the type of care you're providing, and hopefully moving away from reporting on some of these cross-cutting measures that have been around for really the beginning of MIPS and back to PQRS, and focusing on those measures that are most relevant for the type of care you provide and then really understanding your cost. We work with many of our clients to open up kind of what seems to be an unknown in terms of how they're getting scored in cost. And as we talk about measure strategy and strategy around MVPs, I want to continue to highlight that cost is one of the categories that has impacted a number of our clients in their decision making to report or not report an MVP in past years, mainly 2024. Leading right into one of our examples here. Now let's take a look at how traditional MIPS really stacks up against MVPs and what you may need to report. So in this example, we're looking at a hematology group, and we're breaking down the measures that have been selected for traditional MIPS against MVPs, the improvement activities, and the cost measures as well. So in this example, we've got 6 traditional MIPS measures. Um, so you have to report on 6. So at the very least, you should track and report on 6 measures. But as you look down this measure inventory in this example, the first 2 measures are advanced care plan and depression screening. These are widely utilized measures. So there are practices who have a lot of experience in these measures, but they're not core to the practice of hematology, and they're not focused when we really talk about comparisons of performance in these measures to similar clinician types. Now compare that to MVP participation. Those 2 measures are not included, but the remaining 4 measures are included in what this group is tracking performance on and reporting for. So these measures are a lot more focused in what the practice specialty, the type of care that's being provided. So again, that's going to lead to more alignment across comparisons and performance and hopefully a more connected experience with those eligible clinicians, capturing performance information on and reporting for these measures. As we move on to improvement activities, as Mike mentioned, one of the differences is you're really doing half of the requirements when you look at traditional MIPS compared to MVPs for improvement activities. So for traditional MIPS, you're doing 2 improvement activities. For the MVP participation, you're doing 1. Now, for the cost measure in this example, we list out here that the traditional MIPS participation is total per capita cost and prostate cancer, while in the MVP, you're limited to total per capita cost and the prostate cancer cost measure. But when we consider practices or eligible clinician groups who may have multiple specialties, if they're doing traditional MIPS, they can be exposed to or eligible for additional cost measures that may not align directly with their care or with the focus of many of their providers. As long as they are um, having enough eligible cases or episodes, they can get attributed those costs and then be required to manage those costs and be scored on those costs, even if they're not really the focus of the practice. So when comparing traditional MIPS to MVPs, and as I mentioned earlier, taking a look back at historical performance, it can help you understand whether choosing an MVP will hone down the number of cost measures you may be eligible for and understand whether that's going to help your performance or not. The reality is you have to compare because if there are other cost measures that have relevance in other types of care or specialty groups, maybe you're doing well in them. So really you need to compare how you're performing and what measures you may be required to be scored in when considering traditional MIPS and MVPs. Now, another example, mental health. We can look at the similar breakdown here, similar type of layout, 6 measures for traditional MIPS, 4 for MVPs. You've got measure 47 and 130 in the traditional MIPS reporting, and those measures are removed, leaving remaining more focused mental health measures for participation in an MVP. Again, you've got 2 improvement activities compared to 1 for an MVP. And then here we see that difference when we're comparing cost measures. With traditional MIPS, this mental health group is scored on total per capita cost, along with depression, psychosis, and an MSPB, while participating in the MVP, they are not required to or scored in total per capita cost. So this may tremendously help their score if they're not looking at the total cost of care for their patients and really focusing on those cost measures that are relevant to their group. Now let's take a look at some subgroup examples. Mike told us a little bit about subgroups and how those groupings can align better with different provider groups within a practice itself. So a subgroup overall is really a portion or any number, 2 or more clinicians within an eligible group. As mentioned also, you cannot report multiple NPIs within separate subgroups within a TIN. So keep that in mind. But in this example, we're looking at one group reporting as one MVP. So no subgroups in this example. In this group, we have 3 different clinician types. We have anesthesiologists, CRNAs, and orthopedic surgeons. And for this group, we can choose between 2 relevant MVPs, patient safety and support of positive experiences with anesthesia, or improving care for lower extremity joint repair. So we can look at these 2 MVPs, we can consider our performance, and we can report at the group level for either MVP. So we go on to the next example. So in example number 2, we can register as 2 subgroups and report on 2 separate MVPs. So here we're taking our group with our 3 different specialty types and breaking that out into 2 subgroups. So we would define to CMS our list of anesthesiologists and CRNAs who will participate in the anesthesia MVP and separately define a subgroup of our orthopedic surgeons to report the extremity joint repair MVP. So this can provide more relevant measures even within a subgroup for participation for a multi-specialty group. And this is, we've noted here and on other screens, is really what CMS is driving towards, so that a multi-specialty group in 2026 and beyond is required to report for subgroups for the different specialties and really aligning those relevant measures with the relevant provider types. So now we'll go on to our third example here, which is further breaking down our group into 3 subgroups to report on 2 MVPs. So this example breaks down that first subgroup into our anesthesiologists and CRNAs. So in this example, each of those groups or subgroups is reporting on the same anesthesia MVP. The difference is each subgroup can determine which measures within that MVP they choose to report on. So if there are differences among the measures, they can understand which set of measures within the MVP will provide them with the best scoring opportunities, therefore further maximizing their performance and score. And the orthopedic surgeons can continue to report on their MVP and align with the measures that best fit them. What's important here to note as well is that you can split your subgroups and report on the same MVP, but you could not perform effectively what's shown here in example 3 and what's shown in example 2. As we mentioned earlier, each NPI can only report within one subgroup. So you couldn't have your anesthesiologist in a subgroup just for anesthesiologists and then a subgroup with the CRNAs as well. But one of the things we pride ourselves on at Healthmonics is we want our clients to have the opportunity to consider all their options. So when we work with groups in NVPs, we can help set you up to consider each of these reporting structures and subgroupings and track performance in each prior to your actual submission. So you can consider which of these alignments of providers will give you the best score prior to your final indication to CMS of how you are structuring your subgroupings before the deadline and before submission time. So now we're going to go on to example 4, which is, as you might expect, reporting traditional MIPS. So through all these subgrouping options, you will still have the opportunity to report traditional MIPS. So this example shows our multi-specialty group that includes all three specialty types or provider types reporting to traditional MIPS. And in doing so, would report on measures that are either applicable across all specialties or at least those measures where they can perform best with the eligible visits for each measure. And in this example, they can report traditional MIPS at the group level as well as report an MVP for a subgroup. So we're showing here the orthopedic surgeons reporting their MVP in addition to the traditional MIPS reporting at the group level. The result of this would be all clinicians receive or can receive the group score through traditional MIPS. But those participants within the orthopedic surgeon group doing the MVP would get the best of the group score or the MVP score. And then any clinicians who were not part of a subgroup, our CRNAs and anesthesiologists, would get the traditional MIPS group score. So we can go on to the next slide. So what to know before you register for an MVP? As we mentioned, you can do traditional MIPS and MVP reporting, and CMS is going to give you the best of both scores. But you do need to actually register to report an MVP. CMS is defined for 2025 the time frame of April 1st to December 1st, 2025, as when you can register to report an MVP. Important to note that only security officials with the QPP site can complete the MVP registration. So as you are considering reporting an MVP, you want to make sure you identify who that individual is within your organization, as they would be required to complete the MVP registration steps. In order to register for an MVP, you'll need to provide your list of clinicians for any subgroups that you plan to report. So as we just talked about, you can track performance throughout the year in any number of different groupings, subgroupings, and MVPs, but when it comes time to actually register, you'll have to provide CMS with a list of clinicians within each subgroup if you plan to report on a subgroup. We've already mentioned a few times, you don't have to report an MVP once you register. And then after registering, you can change or delete your registration up until December 1st. So if you did want to register a list of clinicians for a subgroup, but then later on you need to change that list, you can do so up until December 1st, 2025. All right, so we've covered a lot of strategy. We've covered a lot of ways to maximize performance within MVPs. We want to show you some resources that we have available to you. and also just touch on a little further how we can support you in maximizing your performance and scores through MVPs.
Thanks, Phil, and I'll let you keep going, but I just wanted to reach out. This is the time to get your questions, and we do have a couple really good questions. Not a ton of time after we're going to get through these slides, but if we have the opportunity, there's a couple questions at the end I'd like to get to. So there you go. Back to you.
Great. We'll go through this and then we'll make sure we save some minutes to cover those questions. So as Mike mentioned, along with the webinar slides, we do have our MIPS Value Pathways overview sheet linked up, so you can download that from the GoToWebinar tool. We also, when you get the slides, you'll have that linked up within the slides, so you can use that web address to visit our site and download this as a quick reference guide to MVPs and reporting strategies for MVPs. Hopefully everyone participating here knows who we are at Healthmonics, but just as some brief information, we really focus on taking these reporting requirements and using technology to make the reporting process more streamlined, easier, and more rewarding to participate in. One of the things we pride ourselves in is sharing information like you've seen here today and in other webinars to help our audience as well as our clients to achieve higher outcomes, participate more regularly, more often, and more easily, and hopefully achieve higher outcomes for their patients as well. We do that through our platforms, MIPS Pro and MIPS Cost Analytics, and allow our clients to bring in their performance data, look at selected measures, track performance throughout the year in a number of different pathways, MVPs, traditional MIPS, and others, and report seamlessly to CMS. One of the biggest things we can recommend for anyone is really understanding your performance throughout the year and not waiting to get started towards the end of the year. So you have opportunities to make critical changes, close gaps in care, and improve your score to achieve the best outcomes you can for your patients and for your MIP submission. As you can see through MIPS Pro, we do that by providing dashboards that we think are pretty easy to utilize and read and really focus on understanding performance as it aligns with scores. And as well, if you go on to the next slide, really opening up the vantage point to see where your gaps are and the opportunities to drill down into different patient visits, look at specific lists of patients, understand all the way down to how your coding is impacting your eligibility and performance in different measures, as well as being able to compare that to your EHR and understand where you're missing documentation within your workflows and where you can stand to improve to increase your completion of different measures as well as improve your score. And as we mentioned for the cost category, our cost analytics platform is really unique in bringing cost data together into a place where you can understand your performance and cost measures. We're pulling in claims data directly from CMS. We are calculating your predicted score in those measures and determining the eligible cases and episodes so you can understand which measures you may be eligible for scoring in, as well as giving you the opportunity to drill down into your cost by provider, cost by episode, and then all the way down into the individual claims. We're really proud of this tool and its insight provided into this category, as it is something that a lot of our clinicians are really just starting to understand now and really opening up opportunities to make an impact on their cost score. So happy to talk more about cost with you individually, and we have other webinars that cover that as well. And also, when we talk about gap closure, a big part of that is using tools like our analytics tool to really understand variation in performance in different patient cohorts. Clients using our tools stand the chance to really break down their performance and their patient populations and their eligible visits and different measures in a number of different ways so they can see where they stand to best improve their performance and score. And again, this is an area where we'd love to talk to you more and see how we can help you out to gain the same insights for your practice. And we're going to leave up our contact information here. Of course, you can receive this as well when Mike sends his follow-up to our webinar with additional resources. But at this time, I want to tee up Mike if you want to, kind of address some of the questions here with the time we've got left, and then we can start to close out our presentation today.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bill. Excellent job there. So the first one, the one question I want to get out of the way, a couple people asked about promoting interoperability. We did not spend a lot of time today on promoting interoperability due to the fact that it's very, very similar to traditional MIPS. So we do have the other presentation that we did earlier, back to the basics, as well as in our past, we do have some promoting interoperability webinars that go over a little bit more in detail of what is needed for promoting interoperability. As you can see, this webinar went on a little long and barely getting a chance to get to questions, so we had to make some cuts to the slides. And yeah. I did have a question. I have noticed many quality measures within an MVP do not have enough volume to calculate a benchmark. How are you scored if you choose measures that do not have a benchmark? So we did, for details of this, we did do this in the basic one, as well as there was a measures webinar that we did, and I'll make sure I get that information out. But the main two ways to score is if a benchmark is created post submission. So that means that it meets the volume in the current year. So if, for instance, 2024, it shows that it doesn't have a benchmark due to last year, it can create a benchmark based upon how many people are reporting for the following year. So what you have with that is really, that opportunity. The other opportunity that you have for benchmarking, uh, if they don't meet that criteria, you will get no benchmark, and that the highest score for a small group will be 3. For a large group, you will get 0 points for it. So uh, I highly recommend, if you are reporting on volume based, make sure everybody volume based measures that are not giving benchmarks, that you report more than the traditional 6, or if you're doing MVPs, the traditional 4, so that if it doesn't get benchmarks, you can help out. However, the measures that don't have benchmarks because of changes or things like that, uh, you know, take a look at them, because there's a couple that are there that are very, very, very popular measures that I have no reason to believe won't get a benchmark in 24 or 25 post submission. So you have the ability to, understand that these measures that have been reported on for years may have just gone through some type of change. Uh, let's see what other ones I have. Here's a good question. We didn't go into too much detail about it, but are the points reweighted with MVPs if you only allowing for 4 measures to meet quality point requirements? Just like in school, if you had 4 tests instead of 6 tests, that's exactly what it's going to do. So instead of it being, counting where you get, um, it's out of 60, you get the 60 points where each measure is worth 10, it will be out of 40 points in that category where each measure is worth 10. So you only need, it doesn't harm you that there are less measures. Uh, I do have a question here. Small practice. Are you able to register for an MVP this year? Are there advantages to moving this year than in the future? It's always good to get ahead of the curve before you have to require to do it. We've been seeing a lot of that out there. People starting to understand what it uh, looks like in the ability for us to get MVP information right now rather than waiting until it's mandatory. So yes, it's always good to do that no matter the specialty that you're a part of. You can always register for it and not report it and just track it. You can always report it along with your traditional MIPS, and they will give you the highest score of the two. That was also another question. Can you report both? Yes, you can report traditional MIPS and MVPs, and CMS will give you the highest of both scores. Um, Previous webinar recordings are located on our website in the top right-hand corner. You'll see webinars, and you can choose any of the webinars and view them right on our screen. So they're all still available. Someone asked if they're not going to be giving you the higher of the two scores. For MVPs and traditional, absolutely. You can report both, and you can report virtual group, you could report full group, individual, subgroup, APM entity, and CMS will give you the highest of the scores, except for, I apologize, virtual group. If you report a virtual group, that's your score. That's what you get. So CMS will allow any of those scores and will pick the biggest one. Reporting measures in their first or second year. Another great question here. So reporting measures in your first or second year, once again, it's very similar to what I was saying with no benchmarks. However, there's a caveat. So for a first year measure, the minimum amount of points that you can get is 1. For a second year, or 7, sorry, and the minimum amount for a second year measure is 5. So there is, a real advantage for reporting new measures. No matter how poorly you score on a new measure, as long as you meet the data completeness, you will get at least 7 points for it. If it's a second year measure, you will get 5 points for it. Those are great considering if you look at the list of measures currently, there are so many measures that max out at 7 points. So take a look at new measures and see if you can um, utilize those new measures to move forward and to help you. If they do receive post-submission benchmarks similar to the ones I was mentioning earlier, you will score between that 7 points and 10. So if you do very well on a new measure, there is opportunity you are going to get 10 points out of it, but you'll also just have that bottom of 7. So highly recommend everybody looks at new measures. All right. The other questions I have are very individually based, and I'll try. I will be getting back to everybody within a couple days here, but I'm going to end our webinar now. Wish everybody good luck and have a wonderful week. And if you can really fill out our survey at the end, it really helps us with future reporting. So Phil, thank you very much for uh, doing the hard part, and I look forward to doing the next one with you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.